Hello, welcome to the Daily Work Journal podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and today we have a really special guest. I'm super excited for you all to hear from him. Dale Everett is a group product manager at Faire, an online wholesale marketplace for retailers and brands. Faire is totally killing it, much thanks to Dale, no doubt, and you'll hear from that in shortly. Prior to Faire, he was an early employee at Opendoor, helping scale Opendoor from roughly 100 employees to 1,000 plus as a product manager and general manager. Specifically, he was general manager for Las Vegas and Riverside and helped open up those markets for Opendoor. And prior to that, Dale started his career at Bain Consulting right out of college, which is where I know Dale from. So I know Dale from freshman year of college. I don't think either of us remember how exactly anymore, but we took a ton of classes. I think you said to me actually years later, Dale, that it was Bruin Bash, but I really don't think so because that was before I really started going partying. So I don't think I would have gone to Bruin Bash.
Yeah, I was gonna say a mutual friend introduced us. I don't know. I was with many good friends. It was like we met sometime and then we became
At some point, early freshman year, took a ton of classes. So Dale and I did many case competitions together. We were both on the consulting track in college, and I was very lucky to get his help because he had his internship and then his offer from Bain when we were all seniors recruiting. So in the fall, when I was trying to recruit, Dale was gracious enough to help me prep my case competitions. So I'm really thankful for that. When I was doing customer research for a daily work journal 2 years ago, I interviewed Dale then too. So that was how I found out that he kept his own form of work journaling, which I'm super excited to get into today. So yeah, and I've never had the chance to share with you, Dale, but I've always looked up to Dale, not only just professionally because he's always been killing it in his career, but I think as a friend, I appreciate how Dale always puts in a lot of time and effort to maintain his friendships. I've been lucky, of course, to go to Dale's annual ski trip in Tahoe, where he arranges this trip for all of us, a lot of our college friends, to come together and have fun at Tahoe. It's a logistical nightmare, but he does it every year. And yeah, and it's been, almost 10 years since we graduated from college. And Dale is always, I know that if I just were to call him, he would be there for me. I was very lucky to live in San Francisco for many years, overlapping with Dale. So we had time to spend socially then too. So it's always been fun. I always tell Dale to move to LA, but I know he's not going to.
always worth a try.
So, okay, let's get into the first question. Formally, it is, how did you get into your career today? Love to hear about that.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Well, maybe I'll start from the beginning. When I was thinking about a college major to pick, I used essentially like process of elimination and was like, well,
Good
don't
one.
really like, I'm a little squeamish, don't really like operating rooms. So a lot of the health majors were kind of gone. And I
Yes.
will whittle down a bunch of the majors basically just by interest and what I was excited about, and was left kind of with engineering and business as like my two potential majors going into college. Then as a result, I picked business essentially because I felt that while I liked the problems engineering presented, I probably was a little bit too extroverted to really just focus on engineering, though I did get an engineering minor. As a
Right.
result, I was a business major at UCLA where we met in the same program. And at that point, I was like, well, what types of jobs do business majors do? And I chatted with a bunch of different people, joined different clubs, and learned that about a few of the major options if you were to be a business major, things like consulting or accounting or investment banking. Then I think you'll find this is a theme over the course of my different career decisions. I make like a pro cons table, which is basically like, here's the different paths I could take, here's why I would take some of the paths and why I would take other the paths. And consulting looked most exciting to me, mostly because you got to learn a bunch of things. I thought I was still early in my career and wanted to keep exploring the breadth of opportunities that were out there. And I liked how many different problems you got to solve as a consultant and how many different exit opportunities there were. So that's what led me to aim for a consulting internship. After I got the
How,
consultant,
let
yeah,
me interrupt you for a second.
yeah,
How
go
long
ahead.
did it take you to get there, even with that first decision? Like, do you remember how many seniors you talked to or whatever people working and how long that process did that take?
Yeah, specifically, I joined a club called Bruin Consulting because I heard it was a good club to join for business majors. That was essentially the extent of it. And when I joined, one of the older members of the club, like you said, a college senior, college junior at this point, Denise, had just gotten her offer from Bain. And I remember thinking, like, that sounds cool, but I don't know what it is. So I went back home and like Googled it in my dorm room and was like, oh, this looks like it could be something that's interesting. But I think it's probably other options would be interesting too. And so that's when I kind of gathered other options. And then I would say maybe sophomore year, after continuing to learn more, talking with different people, I felt a little bit more sure that consulting is at least something I wanted to try. And that's when I applied to like a ton of consulting internships for my sophomore year and ended up doing that sophomore summer.
Got it. So you were in BC and you joined it before you really even had a good clue about what consulting was.
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
I had heard from a friend that it was like a very fun organization. You learned a lot. So I was like, cool.
Dale is very humble, but for everybody out there who does not know what BC is, Bryn Consulting is one of the most prestigious clubs you could join at UCLA. The acceptance rate of BC, and first, I applied to BC and it did not get in. So the acceptance rate of BC is incredibly low. It's like less than Harvard. Like what, 4% is Harvard acceptance rate or something like
I don't know. Maybe it's something like that. But
that? Okay, got it. Okay, so then you were saying, okay, you wanted to explore consulting. You were fairly confident that that would be something you wanted to try.
totally. And one thing I'll advise people to do as well, which I also did, is I think you want to have like a primary destination in mind. I've heard some folks also give career advice that you just kind of see where the wind takes you, which I mean, that certainly works for some people. But I also don't think you want to be laser focused on a single thing. So I thought consulting was like the working hypothesis, but also explored some other things on the side, right? I was like, would I like finance? I don't know. Like, should I work in tech? Maybe. Like, I don't know what those things are. And I mean, even now in my career, which I imagine we'll get into too, is like there's a working hypothesis for where I think I'm going to head, and then there's other options as well, right? So,
I love that framework. That's awesome. Okay, so now you are at Bain Consulting. You have your offer and you join right after college graduation.
yep. So I worked at Bain for almost 2 years, and it was an incredible experience. Met some of my best friends there. And one of the biggest reasons I went to Bain was to learn as quickly as possible, like about the business world, have a real job. And the main thing that what one thing that will like the chat about is I do structured reflection on my work. And I started that really early in my career, basically at the beginning. And
Yeah,
one thing I realized was at Bain, my learning curve was starting to kind of like cap out a little bit, to use the economic like marginal curve piece.
yeah.
And that's not to say that I wasn't still learning. There's a lot to learn at Bain and you learn a ton, but the growth rate of your learning certainly slows down a little bit. I remember when I joined Bain, I would always say, like, I didn't even know how to write an email. Like, I knew how to send an email, but like not how to write an actual business email.
Yeah.
And after a year and a half at Bain, you get a lot of practice sending good emails, which is great. But over time, you start to slow down on at least some of those skills. So that's when I started asking myself the question, like, is consulting the path I want to continue down, which I thought was a very valid path, by the way, and many of my friends did it. But should I also explore some other potential options, very similar to what I did when I was going from business to the next thing in college? I thought, okay, well, I'm at Bain now. What are some of the different places that people go to after they work at Bain? As a result, I called a bunch of alumni who had left Bain a few years earlier and tried to figure out what they were doing. And just like I did when I was choosing which kind of job to take out of the biggest business career, like out of a business major, I made a pros and cons table and I said, okay, like Bain people will go into nonprofits. Here's the pros and cons. Bain people will do venture capital. Here's the pros and cons. Bain people will do private equity. Here's the pros and cons. Bain people will do like corporate strategy at like a big company. Bain people will do startup. And after talking to maybe like 5, 10 people I threw in a spreadsheet and like friends that I reached out to, I thought startup best aligned with what I wanted to do, which is
Okay.
what I was really looking to get was to get back on that kind of outsized learning curve. That was what I was missing most about 2 years
Wow.
into Bain, is I felt like I was growing so fast and I felt the growth rate start to slow a little bit.
Mm,
And what I heard from people was the best option out of those options to grow quickly and learn the most in your career was to join a startup. So that's what it was going to be, and like that was my goal, and I said about that as kind of like my next step.
What? Okay, so did you ask five people total or five people in each sector, like five in nonprofit, five in startups?
Probably more like 10 people total, two in each. I remember chatting with two VC friends,
Got
one
it.
friend at a nonprofit, like three friends that worked at startups, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to the structured work reflections a little bit. I
Yeah.
think this might be a good time to talk about that. What does that look like? And it sounds like the pro con table was key to that.
Yeah, so essentially the way this looks for me is the what why I started it was when I entered the work world, I was just like, wow, like so much happens, and one thing I just wanted to do was just to remember all the work I did. I'm sure everybody has
Yes.
had this experience where you're like, oh, I need to like write a resume. You're like, oh,
Yes.
what was that project? Like, what were the results of that? You're like,
Yes.
oh man, you're trying to dig it up. So part of it was just like a memory jogging application for me. The
Yeah.
other part of it was I've always liked reflecting, even like when we were in college, but especially with work where you could choose to leave at any time for the most part. Whereas at UCLA, I was like, I'm gonna aim to graduate. I always like to check into myself on like how I'm doing at work.
Hmm.
And so my format has evolved slightly over time, but not too much. So the frequency is every quarter. I found that's just like the right balance between feeling like I'm always reflecting and like if you reflect yearly, I think for me at least, I would lose some of that like
It's
I
too
would
long.
like to remember what
Yeah.
I've done. Yeah, I'd be like, wait,
Yeah.
what happened in January, right? Like if I think in
Yes.
March what happened in January, I can probably remember. And so
Yes.
as a result, I basically list the work that I've done, kind of stream of consciousness style. I'm basically like, hey, what are all the things I did? Then I will also say like, what's my like, how happy am I at work? Like out of 10, not particularly scientific, but just get a sense of like, am I liking my job? And
Yeah.
then I will list kind of the best parts of the job. I'll be like, what are the things that are really giving me joy at work that are exciting? And what are like the worst parts of the job? Like what are the things that I could probably do without right now. And the
Hmm.
idea behind that is just to get a pulse check over time of what I enjoy doing, what I don't like doing as much, how that's changed. And if I'm consistently not happy, like, is there something I can do to
Yeah.
reflect? I'll also think about what went well. Like, what are a few things from the last quarter that I'm really proud of, and what are some things that I could like do better in the next quarter to improve on. So I
Got it.
use kind of those five sections of like stream consciousness plus like out of 10, then like went well or what went well, um, what went poorly, and work from there.
Yeah. And so this sounds like a digital, you keep a digital document of this somewhere.
Yeah, it's all in Dropbox paper, which I don't know that like anyone uses Dropbox paper but me, but I love that application. And so I've got a big long Dropbox paper. I think it's named like Dale's Work Reflections or something.
Got it. Okay. And so you're there every quarter. How often, I'm curious, do you look back on your work reflections like 5 years ago? Is that relevant anymore? Is it just more like quarter by quarter?
I think I will look at it mostly when I have a decision coming up because I might want to look for trends of like, oh, are there things that were giving me energy for like many times in a row, right? Like, was doing analysis some like my perhaps like my next role will include more analysis or something. It's like, well, I know how I feel right now, but if I look back, is doing analysis actually something that I was like really excited about doing or whatever it might be? So
Yeah.
not that often. I would say mostly when I'm facing a decision.
Got it. Interesting. Did you ever get to a point where you plotted this stuff? Like how happiness score, blah, blah, blah.
No, especially because it's quarterly, you can kind of scan it pretty quick because it's collapsible and like toggles, right? So I think you can kind of scroll through it and be like, oh, things haven't been great for like the last 6 months or whatever it is.
Got it. Yeah. There's no reason to over engineer if you don't need to. Okay.
But it could be
Cool.
fun.
Wait, what?
It could be fun though. I see a line over time. I wonder. Yeah.
Well, okay, so now you've decided you wanted to be at a startup, and then you went to Open Door, right?
Yes, open doors.
Okay, tell us about that. How did that come about and the decision? Because I'm sure you were considering, and I think I even remember you were considering various startups.
Yep, absolutely. So the first thing I did was I tried to think about like what should I optimize for? Like I didn't know anything about it. So I asked some of the older friends, like if I'm looking for a startup, what should I optimize for?
Right.
And people's general advice was the number the two most important things to optimize for are the growth of the company and the ability of the team, which you could call ability of the team maybe a sub factor of like growth of the company. But
Yeah.
the idea there being that a quickly growing company likely means that they've solved a real problem for users, unless it's all like advertising based,
Eight.
which is something you
Yeah.
should look at. Yeah.
Okay.
But we can talk about how to look at that. But if the growth of the company is real and the teams are really good, that's probably the most important things. And the next most important thing would be size. Like there's a big difference between joining a 5-person startup and a 100-person startup, even if the 100-person company is still a startup.
Right.
And what I felt was I wanted to join something that was like a mid-sized startup with momentum coming from Bain, which is a really, really big organization. I
Yeah.
didn't know if I was quite ready to join like 3 people in a garage in a dream,
Yeah.
which there's reasons to do that too. And
Yeah.
actually, one of our mutual good friends at the time, Frank, was looking to join something much smaller after he was leaving Amazon, and I was looking to join something that was like Series B to D, which is probably roughly like 30 people to like 200, 300 people.
Got it.
As a result, I looked up a bunch of lists of just like fastest growing startups. Like there's a list
Nice.
called the breakout list, or I just Googled like fastest growing startups, or I just asked people I knew. And
Yeah.
I tried to get in touch with any one that I knew from these places. Often there's a Bain alum there that you can get connected to or reach out to. And
Makes
if failing that, I would just apply to anything that they had online, and failing that, I would just reach out to like the recruiter, or if the company is small enough, just like the head of whatever division I thought made most sense.
Yeah.
And that was how I generated a list of maybe like 35 or 40 startups.
Oh, that's a lot.
I feel like I should pull it up and see how many of them are doing well. Just
Yes.
how many of them are doing well. And I was lucky enough, after applying to probably like 40 plus places, I was lucky enough to end up with 3 offers, which is always a bit of a song and dance to like line those up like in the correct way. But was lucky enough to be able to choose between 3 companies. Open Door, a company called Segment, which is doing very well, and a company called Thanks, which was founded by a former Bainey as well. And so
Okay.
was really excited about all 3 offers, and ultimately chose Open Door for the aforementioned reasons. The team and the growth rate, I thought those were both really compelling. And yeah, I joined Open Door in, it must have been 2016. 2016, yeah.
Yeah, and you were there for a while. Okay, so now you picked Open Door. Tell us about the roles you had at Open Door and how you navigated that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this when I joined Open Door, it was still a pretty small company. We were in 2 markets, Phoenix and Dallas. And I thought that the idea of like buying houses without seeing them was exciting, but probably pretty risky. So I definitely still had a backup plan of potentially attending business school in my back pocket when I joined Open Door. Well,
Okay.
that's not what ended up happening, actually. I almost could not have been luckier with how everything went. Open Door grew really quickly. We were solving a real need for customers who wanted more flexibility in selling their house. And as a result, exactly what you hope happens at a quickly growing startup, where there are more jobs to do than people to do them, and they look internally for people
Wow.
to fill shoes. So I started in business operations, which is a very common place for consultants to start, and we can chat about that if it's helpful. But the business operations means something slightly different at different startups, but they're
Yeah.
often like Swiss Army knives. Like what I was working on was like our pricing metrics, like how we measured pricing, like how we used operations to improve how we were pricing houses, those sorts of things. But then the big moment for me at Open Door was, I remember I got an email that said like Las Vegas general manager, and we were opening our 3rd market, and there were already 5 or 6 team members out there, and they were looking for someone ideally internally to manage the team out in Las Vegas. And when I got the email, I actually thought it was like a mistake.
Wait,
And
why?
well, I never managed anyone before. It was
Oh,
my
okay.
very first time as a manager. So, and we
Okay.
had plenty of great people at Open Door, but I think that there was a few things. The company felt that it was something that I would be able to do well. And you also you have a broader view of like the people that are there. And sure, we had lots of great people at Open Door, but there's lots of work to be done, right? So you need to
Yeah.
allocate people in the best possible way. So I thought that this could work. And the other complications, like I didn't live in Las Vegas, I lived in San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
The idea was for me to fly back and forth. So interviewed internally for that role, which as it often works at small startups, so it sounds is a lot less formal than it sounds. Basically, chatted with the people I'd be working most closely with, talked about what we were hoping to see in Las Vegas, and
Yeah.
I will be forever thankful for the folks there for like just giving me the opportunity to lead that team. I
Wow.
spent probably about a year flying back and forth to Vegas every
Every week.
every week, yeah, which
Yeah.
was an incredible experience. It was probably the most formative professional experience if I like reflect back on my career. Uh,
Wow.
I mean,
Why do
one
you
of the
say that? Tell me.
I think I just learned so much so quickly and most directly about like managing a team. I think that's like a difficult skill to learn, and all first time managers make mistakes. There's no way around it. And I think I was able to make those mistakes, learn from them quickly, um, and just it was also just really fun, like growing the team and seeing us go from buying 5 houses to 10 houses to 20 houses to turning around and selling those 5 houses we bought, um, and whatever it might be. So yeah.
Wow, love that. Well, actually, as you were saying this, you're generating an awareness in me is that I have actually never worked in an environment where it was growing like the way you just
Oh
described,
yeah.
where there was like more work than people. And then, like, yeah, I've never honestly worked at a startup. My smallest company I worked at was pretty established by the time I got there. So,
Totally.
yeah,
That's relatively common, right? I think like I would almost say it's more common than not that most people haven't worked at a startup. Like it's a pretty unique environment that you need to be ready for to jump into. So
yeah, fascinating. Okay, so you were doing GM of Las Vegas for how long?
probably about a year. I'm curious if I actually look back in my notes how long it was, but it almost certainly rounds to a year in either direction.
Okay, cool. Got it. And then you managed people, and that was your first time.
Yep, that was
That
my
was
first time. It was great. And then the once we kind of had the market like up and running and things were working, it was one, very exciting, and two, I was doing a lot of flying even after
right.
consulting. So I
Yes.
think that it was always kind of the goal that I wouldn't just do that indefinitely. So we started looking for a full-time replacement for me to kind of like bring me back to San Francisco. And we found a full-time replacement for me, hired her as kind of like the new GM of Las Vegas. And then the company was again like really gracious, and they're basically like, yeah, like come back to San Francisco, you have a broad generalist set of skills, like where do you think you could be most impactful? And one thing that we did in Vegas is we learned a lot about pricing houses. And one thing I was excited about was like using technology to help price those houses and call it like a more horizontal way. Like we were pricing houses in Las Vegas, but could I help price houses kind of across all of the markets at
Yeah.
open by building technology? And that fell into the role of kind of like a pricing product manager, which just so happened we had a need for at the
Oh,
company as
cool.
well. So
Yeah.
that's sort of how I started in products. I was like, oh, that sounds like a really exciting opportunity if it fits with the business needs. And Open Door was like, sure enough, it does. And so that was something that I ended up doing and absolutely loving as well.
So you were
Just
a pricing product manager then.
yeah, at Open Door, exactly. We
Okay.
built tools that helped our team deliver more accurate prices to customers.
Got it. Staying with that, I'm curious what's your school of thought on when is it appropriate, or like how would you go about kind of asking for what you want at work? Like if that timing didn't work out for you, but you no longer wanted to be the GM for Vegas, like how would you go about kind of asking for what you want?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the first thing I'll say is you probably need some baseline level of trust and reputation to ask for something. And what I mean by that is oftentimes, let's say you join a company in a role and it's not exactly the role you want, and you kind of want to be keeping an eye out to go somewhere else later. It may make sense to build a little bit of like goodwill and reputation before you kind of make that ask, call it 3 months, 6 months ish.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's an argument to be made for asking upfront as well, like before you join, and basically saying, hey, that's something that I would like to explore. Is that a possibility, at least in the medium term? And maybe now I'm walking back, building that piece first. Because I think in general, folks, including myself, probably wait too long to ask as opposed to too early. And if you're working with people who have your best interest in mind, also have the company's best interest in mind, that you admire and you think are like good people who are looking out for you, you should always be able to advocate for what you want in a reasonable way. I think what you have to give in return is it might not be able to happen immediately or at all, but
Yeah.
it can be more of a discussion in that way instead of people just having to guess what you want. So yeah, maybe I would just say as early as is reasonable would be the time to raise it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So then you became pricing PM. Um, would you say that even at that point in your career, you were still optimizing for the most amount of learning, or tell us more a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. I think that I was still very much optimizing for learning quickly. And one of the things I wanted to learn was whether I liked being a product manager or not. I thought it was something that it's probably no secret that ideally you're in a job that you both like and have some capability on. I thought it was something that I could both be at least okay at and enjoy, but that was just like a guess, right? From talking to people, you
Yes.
don't really know until you do the job.
Yes.
So that was the main like hypothesis I was trying to test when I joined as a product manager.
Got it. Okay. How long were you pricing PM for?
For maybe about a year and a half as well, like maybe for the rest of most of my time at Open Door. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe
And then
2 years. Yeah.
yeah. And then I feel like I hope listeners can put together what a working hypothesis is, but just in case they don't get it, can you explain what that is?
Oh yeah, totally. No, basically the idea behind a working hypothesis is like this is my best guess of what I'm going to do. And the reason why it's a working hypothesis is you want to make sure that you're appropriately unsure with yourself. Like you don't want to be like, I want to be a PM because you might say like, okay, how would you know that? You've never be a PM before. So the way
Yeah.
I think about it is like my working hypothesis right now is that product management will be something that I like doing. So that's my current goal and what I'm aiming for. But it's
Yeah.
not just like for sure what I'm gonna do no matter what, like regardless of what else I learn.
Yeah, I feel like as we mature, more of us have been adopting that. But earlier in our careers, I see more folks who are like, that is exactly what I want. It's like, I don't even know, like Stanford GSB or bust, or like,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I got to do that, or like, that's all I want to do.
Totally, because your hypothesis might be like false, right? Like I might be a PM and be like, oh, actually, like I really don't like thinking about the technical side of things. Like, never mind. Like, now we need a new hypothesis for like what I want to do.
Yeah. So it sounds like you enjoy PMing.
Yeah, it's been great so far. I think that's still the hypothesis for where I'm headed with my career.
What do you like about it? What do you not like about it?
Yeah, I think the best parts of being a PM are these things if I had to pitch it. One is when it's at its absolute best as a PM, you really are like inventing the future. Like along with your cross-functional
Oh,
teammates, of course, you don't do it as you're like on your lonesome, which is a big part of being a PM. But when things go well, you
yeah.
actually bring a product or a feature into the world that like didn't exist before the team set out on doing it.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. And it's especially cool when customers use it and it works. And you look at the data and you're like, wow, the world is better for our customers than before I launched that. So that is like a really exciting part of being a PM. Another few things about being a PM that I liked. One, it uses a lot of the same skills as consulting, and it's very multifaceted in terms of what you do and how you spend your day. And I
Hmm.
think that some people prefer to get like very deep in one piece of craft. PMs, I heard a joke one time that like you need to be like a B minus at many, many things. So like as an
Oh,
engineer, you need to be like an A plus code writer. As a designer, you need to be like an
yeah.
A plus UX designer. Like as a PM, like maybe you need to be like an A plus writer and communicator. But for the most part, like you're just okay at a lot of different things, which can
Yeah.
actually be frustrating. But I knew for myself, I'm like have endless hobbies and curiosity. So that's something I really liked about the role as well.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like a perfect
I
fit.
also yeah, I also think that it's like it is a good way to leverage like kind of business skills in tech if you're interested in kind of working in technology. So those are probably the best things about being a PM. Not PMing is not for everyone. There's definitely a few things that can be difficult about it. One is what we talked about. You can be like a jack of all trade, master of none. That's certainly one. The other one is PMs tend to have relatively high pressure and goals, but you actually don't. No one reports to you as a PM.
Yeah, that's right. Because
PMs are like
engineers, yeah.
yeah, engineers report to the engineering manager and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
design manager. So no one reports to you, but you're often at least feel directly responsible for the results along with your partners of what's
yeah.
happening. So being able to get that done is it can feel difficult for some people.
How do
Uh,
you navigate that? Yeah.
yeah, totally. I think that like the a few principles I've used to navigate that piece. One of them is that the first person to convince is yourself. And what I mean by that is I have to be sure that what we're building is the right thing to be building, or it's going to be really hard for me to like convince the team that it's the right
Yeah.
thing to do. Then I would say the second thing that I tend to do is just to really lead like relationship first. I think where PMs often get into trouble is when they're like, we need you to do X, like come hell or high water. But one thing I always try to do is really open up the room to other people's point of views, what they think is the right path forward, what else is going on in their life, and just making sure that you're being a listener before being a talker when possible.
Mm.
And then I think when there is a chance that points of views are different and people think that actually there's a different way that you should go, or they think something else is happening, I think you very first need to understand their point of view, as I was mentioning the listening piece, and like truly believe that they could be correct. And then if you actually think that they're not correct and that perhaps building something else would be better, I try to just lay out as simply and as compellingly as possible why I think that's the case. You might say, hey, I believe that like making the button red is better than making the button blue. And the
Yeah.
reason why is because we have like this experiment and this piece of research and this that makes me think that this is a better decision. If you think blue makes more sense, I'd love to hear why you think those, like why you think that makes most sense. And that way you can just kind of gather the evidence and ideally put them against each other and make a decision from there. So those are probably the main ways I think about trying to influence without direct authority, but it can certainly be difficult.
Yeah, it's like influencing up, down, sideways also.
Yeah.
What do you think about the joke online or like the meme online where they talk about how PMs like you don't know how to do your actual engineering? Because many don't, but many do. They could.
Definitely no. Most do not. Yeah.
Do you feel like that handicaps you in any way, or if you feel any self-consciousness about that?
Um, I think that's why you have a team, right? I can't say I feel particularly self-conscious, but I do think one thing as a PM is you want to share the credit, not as like a how to win friends and influence people type principle, but because the credit actually deserves to be shared. And when we were talking about like, oh, when you build something with your teammates, because as a PM, you don't actually build anything most of the time, right? So I
Yeah,
think that's why you need the team to be there.
got it. Okay. So then you were pricing product manager for a year and a half. Then what did you end up going to do?
Yeah, so I was actually asked by Open Door to fill in as the Riverside or general manager, which is down in Southern California. The
Yeah.
idea there was that we needed someone to help build the Riverside market. We really wanted to launch it to kind of meet the goals of the business and what we wanted to do. We didn't have a general manager basically on hand. It's something I had done before, so there was a request for me to do that again, which was the best thing for the business. So I was like, hey, sounds good. I enjoyed the job the first time, despite liking being a pricing product manager. I'm happy to go do that as well. So I went down to Riverside for a handful of months, maybe 6 months ish, and at that point decided that we were going to look for a replacement to similar idea to Vegas. But at
Hmm.
that point, I would have to reintegrate into San Francisco again. And
Right.
that was where I kind of thought, oh, do I want to jump back to my old job, which I really liked, and I like the company as well, or could this also be a moment to look elsewhere and think, hey, might there be other product management jobs that are also exciting?
Got it. And then so tell us that was when you quit Open Door, right?
Yeah, after looking around a little bit, what I ended up convincing myself of was that while Open Door was an amazing experience, and many of my best friends come from Open Door as well, and I learned so much, that I thought that Open Door has a lot of operational and financial capability as well. And I wanted to go somewhere where both it was smaller. Open Door was above 1,000 people by the time I left, and I wanted to kind of go somewhere that was 100-ish people again. That was one of the
Mm.
main factors. And the other factor was I wanted to go somewhere that I felt the software was like more front and center. So that's what kind of drove my decision to
Oh,
move out to Open Door and look for what's next.
I love that. Where did you get the idea that you wanted the software to be front and center?
I think I learned it over time at Open Door, where people will talk about companies as like design led or engineering led or product led. And I think it's always a little tricky to define exactly what people mean by that. It's a little bit more like, oh, you know it when you're there. But I wanted to go somewhere that felt a little bit more product led as opposed to like finance and operation led.
Yeah, and Open Door had houses, and at Faire you don't. Well,
Exactly.
is that how
I think
you?
for
Yeah,
for good reason, Open Door had an extremely strong
yeah,
finance and operational component while I was there, and they still do. Yeah.
got it. Wow. You know what? Every point of these times where you had a turning point, did you ever felt any dread? Like, I know you were like talking about this so like calmly and level headed, but were you ever like freaking out?
I think these are important decisions. So it's always something that I would work through. Like I would always have the paper doc, as I said, like the trustee pros, cons, like why am I making the decision I'm making sort of thing.
Yeah.
I can't say I felt dread. There's always some concern that you're making the wrong decision. But one thing is in each of these circumstances, I actually really liked the company and was under the at least idea that the company liked me. So one thing that always helped me make the jump, both from Bain and from Open Door, was that I knew I'd probably be able to go back if I really wanted to. And you see this sometime in businesses. Like when I left consulting, I was like, what if this is the wrong call? And actually we had a class of maybe 10 or like 12 like consultants that were 2 years out of college, and I was the only one that left after 2 years. Everybody else stayed for at least 3 years.
Oh,
So I
wow.
just felt a little bit of, maybe not dread, but a little bit of like, am I getting something wrong? Like why am I the only one
Yeah.
that's going somewhere else instead of staying for the third year? But
Yeah.
I think what helped convince me to go was I felt I could always just send an email to Bain, and hopefully they would be, no guarantee, but there's probably a pretty good chance that I'd be able to work there again. That's not true for every job you leave, obviously, but I think for at least in my professional experience, the two I've left, I thought that to be the case, which helped me feel a little bit stronger that perhaps I could make the jump.
Wait, I'm curious, these pros and cons tables, were they ever very close? You were like splitting hairs?
Yeah, definitely. I
Were,
think
okay.
that I think that the ones that were the the decision to move to the next step of my career wasn't that close of a decision each time. Like it felt like more cleanly the right thing to do. What was
Okay.
much closer was deciding between the three different startups on my first
Ah,
time. And
okay.
actually, when I left Open Door, I was also deciding between three different options when I chose to join Faire. Those ones were ones where I had the pros cons table, and I was like, I don't know. There's pretty clear pros and cons to each. And at some point, then once you've thought it through and you've
Yeah.
like talked about it with like, I call it your personal board of directors, like the people that
Yeah.
you run decisions by. At
Yes.
some point, if it's that close, there's no obviously right or wrong decision. And I would just need to tell myself I need to stop ruminating over it and just pick, right? Because you're like, okay,
Mhm.
like I think if you haven't thought about it at all, then the advice to go with your gut can actually be a little bit misplaced, because you're kind
Yeah.
of like, wait, have you, okay, maybe go
Agreed.
with your gut or go with your heart eventually, but like are you sure you haven't at least thought about some of the factors involved? But I
Yeah.
think once you've thought through the factors and you feel like you're not missing anything at least big, if it's still coming out close, then I think you just need to do the sort of thing where you like flip a coin and be like, if it's heads, I'm going to go to whatever company. And then you don't need to go to whatever it says, but try to do that to like tease out like how you're actually feeling about things.
That is actually a coaching tool. Like I will flip a coin and no matter what ends up happening, it does the trick anyways, because I can show
Yeah,
you like, oh, it was tails or heads that you expected, and then you'll have a gut reaction. Like I did not want that. I did not want the
yeah,
heads.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly what I use that trick for sometimes is just kind of like, well, what do you hope it lands on? It's like, good,
Yes.
the coin didn't actually decide your fate, so whatever you're hoping it lands on, choose that. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. Was it that, so it was that close the second time around when you decided between the three different places? And how did you then decide? Did you go with your gut then, or you flipped a coin?
Yeah, with the same reasons I joined Open Door were the same reasons I joined Faire, and those are the strength of the team and like the growth of the company. So those were the tie-breaking factors for me. Is there were other things in like the cons column, but I felt that Faire had the strongest growth rate, which also was backed by actual customers liking the product as opposed to a growth rate that was like fabricated, and that the team was the strongest, and as a result that's why I picked it. But it was a close call. I think that the other companies also had those going for them, maybe just to a slightly lesser degree.
Got it. Very cool. So at Faire, you're GPM. Tell us about that. That means you manage a team of PMs.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Faire, I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary, which has
Oh
been
my
awesome.
gosh.
But my first couple years at Faire, I was a IC, like an individual contributor product manager. And then a
Okay.
little over a year ago, I became a group product manager, which is exactly what you said. You manage product managers. I don't know why they didn't call it a product manager. It was a different
Because
role.
it would then confuse with PMM and people
That's
get
true.
very
That's
confused.
true. It's already confusing for people. No need to make it worse. Um, but that, yeah, the role is essentially as you described it. If you lead a group of product managers, presumably with a charter or a set of missions that kind of tie closely together, so there's some synergy across the groups.
Mhm.
And I see my goal as a group product manager split into a few different things that I look to achieve. I say the number one thing I look to achieve is just to like really help my team get what they need to get done. And so that can look like any number of things. Most of the time it's probably collaborating with them on different pieces of work where they'll say, hey, I'm thinking about this problem this way, and we'll be able to jam on it, work on it, whatever it might be. Other times it might be helping them with resourcing requests or like setting things up across the org or delivering context. But that's probably one of the two things I am most excited about is like helping my team succeed on with whatever they're doing. Then the other thing that's most critical to nail is nailing the group level strategy. And what that is like, what should these 4 PMs areas be focused on? And of
Right.
course, I'll take their advice deeply into account here. And once those areas are focused on, I try to give as much autonomy as possible to PMs on how to get there. But as far as what our focus areas should be as a group, that's something that I feel pretty directly responsible for. And then with a lesser amount of my time, probably like up leveling across the org or like helping to interview or like whatever those might be. But
Got
that's
it.
what my main like job responsibilities look like.
So you don't have a your own PMing work stream anymore. You don't do IC work anymore.
I don't, yeah, not
Wow.
at all. I mean,
Wow.
here and there to the extent it relates to the group, but I haven't launched like an actual feature in like a year, which feels kind of crazy. More than a year.
Do you equally like being a GPM or back to being an ICPM?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was just chatting with some friends at Fair about this. I think it depends on who you are and what you're looking to do, right? Because I think that designers and engineers feel this a lot too, probably even more so than product managers, where sometimes engineers will become engineering managers and they just like miss coding and they'd
Yeah,
rather just code and
exactly.
build, right? I think
Right.
that could totally be true for PMs also, where the job does change pretty fundamentally. You think about some of the same problems, certainly, but at some point, like you are not shipping features into customers' hands. You're doing that by proxy when you become a group product manager. So for me personally, I've known since I was a general manager at Open Door that I just really enjoy like the puzzle and the rewards that come with managing in terms of being able to invest in someone, watching them kind of succeed. Those are all things that I like doing, but there's certainly downsides to being a GPM as well. And I think that uh, product managers, when they're considering whether it's the IC track or the manager track for them long term, I think it's a really valid question.
Got it. Fascinating. Is it not common for people to kind of rotate through if you like try like GPMing
That
double
is that is what I would suggest for
Okay.
most people. I think that there's some people that where they're just sure they're like I would much rather like continue to work in a product pod and ship things. In which case, like why try something that you're like reasonably certain you're not going to like? But
Right.
if you think that you may like it, but you have reservations, you often can jump tracks back and forth. So if you
Mhm.
think that's a possibility, what I normally suggest to people is try to be a group product manager when the opportunity arises with respect to the business as well. And then you can see whether you like it. And to the extent you do it for 6 months, a year, and you're like, actually, I really miss being an IC,
Yeah.
that's almost always something the company will explore letting you do.
To come back. Okay, now I'm noticing my brain jumping to people topics. So you manage people now, which we've never really talked about. I'm
Mhm.
curious if you, okay, this is just obviously my journaling brain. Have you ever asked your direct reports to keep a journal and what would that look like? Or do you feel like that's a little like too personal and like they do what they want to do and you just manage them elsewhere?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, not a journal directly per se, but one thing that started for me at Bain that I've kind of adopted as a product manager is I will have my weekly one-on-ones with my directs, and those tend to be the topics are open, most directly driven by them, but those tend to be a little bit more tactical and about the work, right? Like we're
Right.
impact sizing this thing and like how large is it? But every month we have separate time set aside for their professional development. And this is what I would think of as more kind of like journaling time. And
Right.
what I mean by that is the one standing agenda item is I always like to check in on how they're doing out of 10 and basically just get a pulse, the same pulse that I try to take for myself every quarter.
Yeah.
My goal there is to kind of catch problems when they're still a simmer as opposed to them surprising us eventually. And then I'll
Yeah.
also try to get a sense of wherever they're sitting at the time, like what would bring them up a point or two, like what would make things better for them. That
Yeah.
way, those things won't always be in my control, and hopefully, I've built trust and rapport with my and good relationships with my team, such that they're comfortable telling me what those things are. But to the extent that we can fix them, we absolutely should work together to do it. And
Yeah.
then we'll also use the time to think through, like, oh, what are your favorite parts of work? Like, what are your parts of work that you aren't liking so much? Like, what are areas you want to grow in? So those are the times we use to kind of like do a step back reflection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're adopting it broader, kind of like agenda for your one-on-ones and having the emotions of how they're feeling guide you to how you would support them. Totally.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, both that and a reflection on kind of like their career, both shorter term and longer term, how it's tracking, and making sure that we're keeping it where they would like to be headed.
Love it. That's awesome. Okay. I think the final two questions we've like chatted through a lot of these things I originally planned to ask you. I'm just looking at that doc. Is if you could give, so for somebody who is earlier on in their career and want to go into PM, what would you advise them?
Oh yeah, interesting. How early are we talking? Are they?
Well, tell us, give us the context. Why would that
Oh
matter?
yeah. I think if you are still in college, then most ideally you probably have a computer science degree, most ideally.
Okay.
Um,
And what if they don't?
business or design might work as well, or an
Okay.
even broader range. Either way, if you're still in college, if your number one working hypothesis, as we've talked about in this conversation, is that you want to be a PM, I would say you should just start in what's called an associate product manager program. And I would just Google associate product manager programs.
Yeah.
And some well known ones are at Google or at Uber or like at Meta or something like that. The reason that's the best way to be a PM is that you start as a PM. So you start learning earlier. And some of
Yeah.
my good friends have done this, right? And if
Yes.
that's what you want to do, I would absolutely start there. I
Yes.
think to the extent that PMing ends up not being right for you, which I think most people find out they like it quite a bit actually. But to the extent that it ends up not being for you, I don't think you've like closed your doors or anything.
Yeah. What would you do then? Yeah.
If you weren't that sure you wanted to be a PM, then I do think consulting is a very reasonable place to start as far as broadening, like keeping your options broad. If you're like, I'm not sure what I want to do yet. The other thing you could do is work on whatever you think it might be. Like if you have a CS degree, you're like, I'm not sure that I want to be an engineer, but I think it's what I might want to do. Then I would
Hmm.
just start there and like
Yeah.
do some reflection and think about it. So that's if you're still in college, then I think that both your major making sure you have a competitive application and applying to APM programs is probably the fastest track.
Got it.
Then if you are basically anywhere else, consulting or anywhere else, I have
Yeah.
PM friends who are like we're in sales or PM friends who were working in other functions before as well. I
Yeah.
think the main thing you want to do is some companies, a very small number of them, will take on product managers who don't have product experience.
Mm.
That's pretty rare. So you either need to apply to associate product manager roles again, and you kind of like start back on that track,
Hmm.
or what you can do with which a lot of people do is to join a function that is close or adjacent to product management. And I can list
Right.
what those are. Analytics is one, like strategy is one,
Yes.
business operations is one, design and engineering are even closer.
Yes.
Like customer support and sales are a little further away, but still possible. And then once you get there, just like build a great reputation, do well at your job, and then start connecting with the product team, start learning more about what they do, and start making it known eventually. Like as we talked about for asking what you want, that it'd be something you'd like to give a try. And
Yeah.
then your mileage may vary. It depends on how quickly the company is growing, what
I
their
love
appetite
that.
for taking on new PMs with less experience is, but
Yeah.
that's the way that I've seen it work for a lot of my consulting friends. For
Yeah.
example, I think we had 7 or 8 business operations people join Open Door together, and everyone who wanted to be a product manager did eventually become one.
Nice.
I think it was like
That's a lot.
a big set of us. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also same. All my old data analytics friends are PMs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so analytics is totally an adjacent function, right? And you
Yes.
need to be suitably patient. You need to find the right fit. Like the first company you're at, that kind of path might not be there. But if you're
Right.
suitably patient, I think that you'll make it happen.
How about if you're a PM, you want to be a GPM? What's that path like? Is that more
Yeah,
straightforward? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think that one's probably more straightforward. The way to do it is to do well as an ICPM. I think that like it's very unlikely that the company will believe in you enough to promote you to GPM if you're not performing well as a product manager. So you can work with your manager on making sure that you do well in that. And maybe that's a separate topic, is how to do well as a PM. I think once you're doing well, then you just need to raise your hand and make it known it's something you would like to try.
Mm.
And then I think you need to be quite patient. Like for example,
Mm.
at Faire, which has been growing really quickly, which is great. It still takes some time because you don't like, it can be very tempting to give people career opportunities that they are excited about, but then you can also run the risk of making the organization like very, very tall if you just
Yeah.
kind of like add GPMs before the organization's really ready for it.
Right.
So you want to get to the point where it feels like the organization's too wide and you probably need to make it a little taller, and you need to be ready with kind of like your ability and making it known that it's something you want to do at that moment.
Got it. Fascinating. What are the next steps of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do really like my job at Faire. I'm just saying that it's been awesome. So I'm planning to be here for the foreseeable future. But if I look even further out, I've got the same sort of working hypothesis model that I've always had. So the
Yeah.
working hypothesis is I like this role and job,
Yeah.
and it points to just like continued leadership within the product organization. And I think that's great. Like that's probably what I like. If I looked at my crystal ball, that's probably what I will continue to do.
Got it.
Like there's nothing else that looks particularly more compelling. Now, one question I always like to ask myself is like, okay, what if that wasn't an option though, right? Like what would I do instead? There's a
Okay.
few things. One which is still within an organization, and what a couple that are like a little bit on the outside. So the things that I would do that would still be within the organization, what would be to kind of take the parts of PMing that I like the most and like
Mm.
work on those. And the
Yeah.
parts of PMing that I like the most tend to be talking to users. So some sort of like research type function,
Okay.
or like thinking about the strategy and like what we should do next. So some sort of like strategy type function would be my two second place choices. And
Got
then
it.
if we thought even more outside the box, I've always liked the idea of like founding something. I
I
used
could
to think,
totally see you do that.
yeah, I used to think that being like a venture scale founder made sense, but as I've worked in startups over the last 7 years or whatever it is, being a venture scale founder is a very large trade-off. I think most founders would tell you that as well. And
Yeah.
I've worked hard my whole career, certainly, but I'm not sure that like that trade-off is one that I'm willing to make anymore. But the idea of founding
Mhm.
something smaller that isn't trying to grow to hyperscale is interesting to me. Whether it's kind of like a consulting business or whether it's like a smaller kind of like software type business or whatever it might be, all
Yeah.
that sounds appealing. So those are some other potential options.
Okay, fun questions. If you get a sponsored by a brand, what brand would it be and why?
Oh
Like
yeah.
literally a brand giving you free products and money and you post Instagram stories for them and stuff like that.
Oh cool. Okay, yeah. It's probably the stuff that I do the most or spend the most money on, right? Would be the most economical. So my thoughts go to I like to like cycle and do triathlon. So a cycling brand would be cool. Like if you got like a
Yeah.
free bike or like free wheels, that would be awesome. My bike brand's name is Argon 18 in specific, but it's just a
Okay.
bike brand, but that would be cool.
Yeah.
I do like to play games, and my computer is an Alienware computer. It's like a Dell
Okay.
brand, so that comes to mind as well. Those are
Love it.
probably the most lucrative and the most directly related to my interest. Maybe snowboarding brand, that could be a third one.
And you can ask them for like a personally monogrammed board or a monogrammed bike and it would like have your name on it.
Yeah, like those. Yeah, that would be my choice, pretty squarely. Or how big could I go? Like Ferrari, like a car brand.
Yeah.
Like I feel like my mind jumps to value.
Unfortunately, I don't feel like Ferraris really sponsor anybody, not even
Yeah,
celebrities, but
F1. Yeah,
that's
cool.
awesome. How do you, this is actually on my fun questions list. How does one start getting good at triathlons?
Oh, nice. Do you ask that with every guest, or is
No,
that
I picked
tailored? Yeah,
something
no,
specific to
no,
them. I don't
I
know.
was just kidding. No, I mean, you basically just need to get started, right? Like I've had plenty of friends get started, and we've guided them sort of through their first triathlon. And
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean by
right.
that is, I think everyone has the capability to run at the very least, and then I think that if you don't know how to bike or you don't know how to swim,
Yeah.
you probably just need to find someone to teach you. And I think it's more a matter of your dedication than getting started. Like if you wanted to do it, you absolutely will find ways to learn how to do the things. And if
Yeah.
not, just reach out to me and like we can set it up. But I think you basically just need to set as a goal that it's something you want to do, and then you have to work backwards and say, hey, I probably want to spend 8 to 12 weeks training, and then you
Mm.
just have to get in the pool, get on your bike and run, and then you'll be in great shape.
The setting intentionality part was the hardest for me. So Danny and I was like, let me try this. And I went on one bike ride with Danny and like maybe
Oh
one
yeah.
with Ashwin. And then I was like, I hate this. I don't ever want to do it.
Oh, totally. But I think that's exactly what you should do. That makes sense. I mean, did you do Paradise Loop? That's a big ride for just
I
getting
don't
started.
even remember the name of it
I think
anymore,
you
but
did
it
a
was like
big ride. Yeah.
across the San Francisco Bridge and I needed it. It was a Saturday and I was like, this is perfect day. I need this, just like this workout. And it was just really hard. So
Totally,
not
totally,
gonna lie.
totally. Yeah, I maybe I should have jumped the gun and would say that that would be what I would do first is confirm that you at least like swimming, biking, and running. So I would probably just try to do them each, and if you like all three of them, then I think you'll make it to do a triathlon. But if you like really dislike any of them, like you'll be doing it. So yeah.
No. Well, actually, this is a good work reflection question. Do you ever find it hard to maintain hobbies, and how do you draw that boundary for yourself and not just like work all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely hard and it's a balance, right? And I can't say that I've got it exactly figured out. I would say a few things. One is like this idea of big rocks. There's this idea that there's a jar and you put the big rocks in first and you let the sand kind of like fill in the sides.
Told me
So
this. Yeah.
I try to make sure that like at least some portion of my hobbies are the big rocks. Like I found that I'm like very unhappy if I don't exercise for a while. So that I just basically need to put that in first. And if work doesn't flow around that for like a super busy week or something, that's fine. It can like blow it away. But if that's like there were times at Bain where I couldn't exercise and I wasn't sleeping enough, and I knew I was just like an unhappy person. So eventually I just had to say, hey, like whatever I can deliver at work while still at least getting 30 minutes of exercising and sleeping enough is what I'm going to need to deliver. It's easier said than done, right? It can be tempting when it's like super busy, but
Mhm.
that would be the number one way I try to do it would be to put those put those hobbies in like main areas in first. The other way I try to do it is to really tier my work and figure out like what's critical. Like what are
Yeah.
my top priorities and what really has to get done, and the to-do list is always longer than your ability to get through it, but what things on the bottom are maybe okay if I like take some time for myself and they push out a little bit longer.
Yeah. That's awesome. Great. Last fun question. What is your favorite thing about the city you live in right now? So Dale lives in Sacramento.
Yeah, we moved not too long ago.
Wait,
Let's
out of Sacramento or into Sacramento?
we live in Davis, California, actually, which is very close to
Yes.
Sacramento. So
Yes.
you're
Yes.
you're
Okay.
you're very close.
Okay.
Um, we like a lot of things about Davis. We really like the running paths. I think that's one thing we like. Maybe I'll pick that as like just how easy it is to get around Davis and like run some bikes. But there's a few restaurants we really like. Like some of the best sushi we ever had was in Davis, surprisingly. It's
Really?
like a little further inland, but there's like a high-end sushi chef who just like decided to start his own restaurant in Davis. So that's been
Nice.
incredible. And we also like once we got our house kind of set up, we also really liked the house we moved into. So those are maybe our favorite things so far.
I love that. Oh, warm fuzzies.
Yeah, come visit sometime. We'd love to come
Yes,
to guest room. So we'd love to get a chance to see you.
I know. Oh my gosh. I meant to come in January when that fell through, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay, final chance for that final general advice.
Oh man, I don't know. I can. I'll text it to you if
Oh,
anything. I feel
well,
like
here,
this
let's look. We
is
did
so
really cover
broad.
all these questions. What
So
do people
broad.
ask you all the time, get on coffee chats to talk about?
We covered a lot of it, right? Like I think most of it, what I ask people on coffee chats is looking to understand
Hmm.
their role, how they chose what they chose, what are the best and worst parts of their job, how they recommend getting into it. I think those are the most common ones. So I
Yeah.
think that we covered those pretty well.
I try to ask you some more personal questions, like, feeling like if you ever freak out when you have to make a decision, because I feel like people are really hard on themselves sometimes when they're
Totally.
faced with those like life-changing paths.
Totally.
And yeah, and you certainly
It can be
did.
hard. Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I just try, as we talked about, I just try to make sure that I've like thought it through. But no, at some point you're just ruminating. And once I'm like not adding things and I feel like I've got the main factors, it's like it can be frightening to like make the jump for sure. And at some point you just need to like jump, and that can be easier said than done. Completely understand.
Yeah, to trust yourself. Did you, so aside, did you listen to my first podcast episode by any chance? Does that
I
sound
haven't yet. I've got it queued up.
You do? Oh, yay.
So,
But this reminds me, like, just I don't even know why this is an epiphany because it really shouldn't be, but I had noticed in more recent months, or rather, I had more articulated in more recent months how important self-confidence is at the basis of everything we do. And so,
interesting.
like, yeah, when I hear you say that, like, I noticed that I'm sure like your baseline self-confidence is higher than probably a lot of people, because I think that's where people's this insecurities stem from, right? Like, oh my God, if I go down this path, I'm not going to be able to come back. Or like, I
Mhm.
missed this like really important turn, like, they won't stop giving themselves a hard time about it. And I think it's because they're lacking that self-confidence, kind of like you're saying, like they have the ability to make it right again in the future, even though it's a path maybe that they wouldn't have seen.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, a couple of reactions. It's a cool reflection. I think one side of it is I do think for decisions that are one-way doors, they probably weren't a little bit more thought, actually. And you still don't want to over ruminate on it, but like it's worth thinking about a little bit longer for um things like having a kid or like getting married. I think those are like big decisions. And then I
Right.
also think that uh the self-confidence piece is a really interesting one. I would say if you were like rate your self-confidence versus the average, I'd say it's a little bit higher. But one thing is that self-confidence isn't like just this brazen belief that I can do anything, right? Like that's just like I cannot run a 4 minute mile, at least not right now, sort of thing. Like no matter what level of confidence you have, there's things that you
Yeah.
can do. But I do think that one thing that helps give me the confidence is that I do think that I'll find out if I like don't if I'm not able to do something. Like when that voice creeps into my head, which is like I might not be able to do it, then I kind of say, okay, that's possibly true, right? And like what would happen if I actually am not able to do it? And normally it's not that big a deal. If it is a big deal, if you're not able to do it, maybe you should like figure out some ways to like be more sure you can do it, or like or whatever it might be. But for most things, it's kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if like I can make this swim or whatever it might be. Well, if it's in a triathlon, there's like tons of boats there to like save you, right? Or you're
Mm,
like, I'm not sure if I'll
right.
be able, like when I became the Las Vegas general manager, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it. Like I honestly didn't think I'd be able to do it. But what I knew was that I was confident enough that I could do my current job at Open Door. So I was like, I'll give it a try. And if I'm not able to do it, I believe enough in the people around me that they will let me like go back to what I was doing before. So I'll at least give it a try. So it wasn't like I was supremely self-confident I could do the new job. Actually, I was like, I don't feel prepared. Like I feel underprepared, but I'll
Yeah.
give it my best shot. And if it doesn't work out, what's the worst that'll happen? Like I'll go back to what I was doing before.
Yeah, I love that. Um, if my therapist joined our conversation now, she would probably say that there's something called parts theory where
Yeah,
you like different parts of ourselves and you can have conversation with the different parts. When I hear like the part of you that gets a little bit like sees the fear or like the uncertainty and what you're about to step into, you have a part that comes comfort it and
totally.
says that what you just said.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think the at least how I've tried to handle it is it's not that you don't alleviate that fear by being like, sometimes you do by being like you've got this for sure if you
Yeah.
actually think it's true, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's just not true, right? Like the fear that you won't be able to do it is actually well founded. Like there's a chance you won't be able to do it. And then
Right.
so then when I try to talk to that like part of my mind, it's kind of like, okay, like let's walk through that. Like let's explore what might happen if you're like not able to do it.
Yeah, love that.